Hey there, friends. I hope that you enjoy this episode of the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast as much as I enjoyed making it. I want to take a moment here at the beginning to extend a special offer, an invitation to you, our dear listeners, to join the Remembering course. Our next start date is going to be in middle of March. This is a powerful, deeply moving, and for many people, transformational experience into the heart of colonization, climate change, family histories, ancestors, and so many other critical intersecting pieces. Just visit our website, Sequoia Samanvaya. All the information is in the link below.
Hello, and welcome to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. My name is Sara Jolena Wolcott, and I am your hostess on this sacred learning journey of unraveling, unveiling, and becoming more fully alive at the end of the world as we know it. In this podcast, we offer up to you, dear listener, 3 forms of episodes to support your journey of remembering and reenchanting. First, conversations with amazing people. Second, storytelling. And third, myth casting. In this episode, we're going to bring you a conversation between myself and another amazing, fascinating leader in the areas of remembering and reenchanting. Hello, I'm so delighted today to be able to bring to you 2 special guests. The first is Ron W. Goode. He's a veteran of the United States Army, a retired community professor at Fresno City College and Oakhurst Center, and a tribal leader of the North Fork Mono Tribe. For more than 40 years, he's been representing the tribe in various capacities, including Willow Creek Watershed Collaboration, Crane Valley Meadow Oak Restoration Project, and many more. In his capacity as a traditional knowledge holder, he has worked extensively with Cal State Fire Department and has been leading cultural burns, and in other ways helping to protect and improve the lands and waters throughout his region. He's also been working with other tribes, including in Sequoia Park and the tribal lands in Mariposa with the Mariposa Miwok tribe. I was introduced to him by my friend, Reverend Katerina, who I am delighted is also able to join us today. She is a Mennonite pastor and educator who offers her leadership at the Wild Church Network in Fresno, California. Katerina is also an organizer at the Doctrine of Discovery Coalition, which centers around racial and climate justice with a focus on Indigenous land rights. Thank you, both of you, for joining me today. I would like to start our opening with a moment of prayer and just giving everyone in this space a chance to start with a prayer for this conversation and to engage our listeners in a deep listening to what we are sharing with our hearts. Ron, would you mind starting? Would you be comfortable starting?
I was waiting for Katerina to kick it off.
I'm fine with Katerina starting. That's totally fine.
It's all right. Creator, thank you for bringing us here together today and help us to form a relationship and an alliance so that we can move forward and do your work. And we ask you to bless us, bless our hearts and bless our words and bless our thoughts. And I ask you to help us to keep strong and keep doing your work. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Mm.
Well, I say amen to that. And I just thank you, Creator, for the work of Ron Goode and for the many people that he's brought together to learn how to tend the land, to learn how to bring fire back, to restore the earth, and to invite others into right relationship with the earth and one another and with you. Thank you for just the power of fire to bring new life and for this conversation today. Amen.
Mm.
Yeah.
Giving gratitude to the many lands, to the many waters, and to the many fires that are having an opportunity to return in an old way. To the many ancestors gathered for our listeners and for ourselves. And may the energy that we share here be for the benefit of past, present, and future generations. Amen. I would love to hear if you could share first, to just share what do we mean by a cultural burn?
Well, first of all, as I always say, the terminology cultural burn is relatively new, some 20, 25 years ago when it was starting to be announced. Elders would say, we didn't do cultural burning. But when you go back and have whomever is speaking with the elders, ask them what they burned and how they burned and why they burned, then we come back to the cultural aspect of their way of life. And so rather it was to keep trails open, keep village open, keep the habitat open for the animals, keep the resources regrowing, whether that be grass or um, food plants or medicine plants or basketry plants, any of these items that served the livelihood and the culture of the people. And so that's, took a long time for people to catch on to talking in terms of using the terminology cultural burn, partly because there is a big difference and between prescribed fire and cultural burning. And we definitely don't want to mix, we don't want to get the two interchanged. And I'm shying away from the word mix because one of the most recent articles that I just put out there, I'm really stressing that the future of where we're going is going to be how we all work together, how we all play together, how that there's space and place for both prescribed fire and cultural burning for both burners, and how we go about doing that and getting that accomplished is probably the nexus that we want to entertain. But with that said, then there's a pretty big bridge to cross, and gaps in the boards, and so you got to tread lightly over them and find the best footing for it. We can discuss that some more, but I just wanted to kind of lay that groundwork. And then when you're looking at purposes of cultural burning, our culture tribes culture, the indigenous culture is their historical background, their historical traditions, the traditions they've carried with them for millennia, and hopefully the traditions we're going to carry forward for the next centuries or two or more. So, but a part of that is culture means the food sovereignty you have, the materials that you can have accessible for creating your basketry, or a hand clapper, or a walking stick, or a slingshot. But it's more than just, certain kinds of resources. As a North Fork Mono tribe, we had over 200 different resources and 95 different foods and numerous medicines. And my contention is that every species, whether you're a mosquito, or whether you're a bat, or whether you're a bear, or a deer, or a fish, or a dolphin, we all have medicine. And if our medicine is not there, that's when you will find things that are going awry within our species. And so today we have the technology to do doctoring, per se, by if there's something wrong with our whales, or something wrong with our sharks, or something wrong with our deer or our bears. But the real bottom line is that we have to look back then to the medicine. And I mean, speaking for me, that the belief power that I have, that Creator gave us all these things from creation time, is that soon as the pandemic hit, and then the first question I had was, where did it come from? Did it come from an animal, or was it man-made? And for a long time, you understand that we never got an answer. The bottom line now is that the best answer that we've received is that it came from bats. All right, but why did that take so long? And if it came from bats, what medicine did the bats need? What medicine do the bats have that they don't have? But
right, okay.
And then if it didn't come from bats and it came from people, then whose sorry excuse was this to try to find out what a pandemic does?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter what country it comes from. That's not important. But that is what prevails with people who really can't think outside of the box, or have a better understanding of where we come from. So then country and ethnicity matters. But in this particular case, it could be anywhere in the world, because it comes down to the thinking of people that maybe border on the evil side of life. If you have to experiment with something to find out what it's going to do, let's move away from that for a minute and go into other types of things, including fire. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know how much time we got here and how long you want me to talk. Just, shut me up. But we, as Native people, we look to the world and we look back at how the world was designed. And there's 4 colors to the world. black, white, red, and yellow. There are a lot more of those colors now because today we have a mixture. But moving back in time, those four major colors, and we look at the African people and say, where's the longest river in the world? It's in Africa. Yes, South Africa has a pretty long river. North America has a pretty long river. Probably Europe has a pretty long river. But ultimately, in our way of thinking, is that the black was in charge of water. White was in charge of fire. And I'm not using this in terms of people. I'm using it in terms of the four colors. And with that being said, then red was over here in North America, was in charge of land. And yellow was in the Asian part of the world, which is yellow. Well, some of those colors have been already exercised to the population, but not so much in the elements. And so let's, in a deeper dive of that those that have been in charge of fire then have been very progressive with fire. We've gone to the moon. We've got rockets that go to the moon, but we have also atom bombs that can blow up the world. And we have no control of the mega fires that are going on now because it's that same group of people that are in charge of fire, and they're not really comfortable with fire. So what we're looking at then, and then let's go to wind, for instance. As I do archaeology work, and been doing archaeology work since 1978, there's studies all over the world, but there are caves, that show wind in a circular form, like a whirlwind or a tornado or a hurricane, and shows different particles, atoms, elements within that wind. So the people that we're saying were in charge of wind understood wind. They knew what wind was all about. Now, guess where I'm going with this for you to understand is that the power of wind. How powerful is wind over there in the Asian area? It's very powerful. It gets watered down when it comes across the big ocean to finally get to us. And by then, it's only strong enough that it may kill, it may damage, but it doesn't wipe us out. It's not totally out of control. So when we look at these different kind of things, let's move to a little more realistic picture. The Creek Fire, for instance. So the Creek Fire burned 378,000 acres. The Creek Fire could have been put out at 260,000 acres. There were fire crews that called in saying they can put the fire out at this point. But it was allowed to go for another 100 and some thousand acres. That's all part of all part of the management and thinking concept of that fire. Now let's see what the fire did. The fire took out all the trees. The fire took out all the vegetation. What the fire left then is basically rock in our mountains. And within those rock systems, trees might take 100, it might take 200 years before any of them regrow. Now, not barring that we're going to go up and try to plant, but you're not going to plant in every single crevice. You're not going to plant in and around every single rock. And that's what's been going on in that environment for thousands of years. Now it's gone. The moment that it was gone, September 2020, the first mono wind that came, at that point in time, a mono wind was usually 60 to 70 miles an hour, which was one hard wind. You can hear it, and you knew when it blew, half your roof was gone and trees over. And less than 6 months after the Creek Fire, in January, February, or March, whatever those 3 months, in that time period, the first mono wind that came in 2021 blew at 90 miles an hour.
Mm.
In 2022, during the same time period, it blew at 110 miles an hour.
Mm.
We haven't seen that wind yet in 2023, but we do have snowpack. So maybe you have something on the ground that might slow the wind, but the wind is going to cause that snowpack to melt because there's nothing there to hold it. We haven't seen flooding yet. Oh, it's been on the news every day, every single news station, every single newspaper, every community has already been affected by flooding. We haven't seen flooding yet. Not once that snow starts melting. Our coffers are almost all full now. They won't be able to hold it.
Mm.
Our dams are antiquated. They won't be able to hold it.
Mm.
So,
and right now the land can't hold it.
Right now the land can't hold it. Thank you very much.
Right.
Because there's nothing on it.
And what I feel like you're getting to, and maybe tell me that I'm right here, like I feel like you're getting to the that's critical relationship between fire and water, and also between fire, water, and air and earth, and like the ways in which, as I have listened to some of your conversations about cultural burning, that the act of cultural burns and bringing the fire back in a ceremonial fashion to the land shifts the land's relationship to water.
The moment we put fire on the land, and the moment fire is on the land, whether it's a wildfire or a prescribed fire or a cultural burn, the water table is going to rise. And the reason for that is that there's a rejuvenation of the plants, the foliage, the trees, and now a root system that can hold the water when it rains or snows, or even moisture. Morning moisture will help that rise, okay, and hold it.
Mm-hmm.
When we're in drought, the water table might drop 8-10 feet. The big trees can go down at least 2 meters and have no problem reaching water. But the shrubs, the plants, the flowers, they can only go 1 or 2 feet, or maybe 1 meter. And that's why they dry up. And so consequently, when a fire comes, they're ready to burn because they're dry and they're easy to light. We burned in November. Well, we burned in November, December, January, February. And that was after already 8 inches or 9 inches of rain, and the fire still crawled. The fire still found grass and had no problem moving out, trying to get away from what we were burning. But slowly, but still, the idea is that that's how dry it was. So when, like you're saying, when you put fire on the land and the creek fire, so when the creek fire went through, you had millions of trees that were no longer sucking water. So our first question to the Forest Service and the Park Service was simply that. What are you going to do with all the water? You know, we got blank stares, of course.
Right, because they're all focused on the fire.
Yeah. And we did the tribe, when I say we went out, and I have a tribal team, not just from my tribe. I use members of other tribes and non-Indian folks that are, smarter than me. My biologist, my botanist, my ethnologist, everybody and anybody that has an interest out there, to help us. We work together. But we assessed 9 new meadows in 2021 in the summer, and every one of our pant legs, boots, all the way up to our knees would get soaked per the meadows. Wet, grasses were wet, water everywhere, because the water was pouring in and coming in to the meadows. But it didn't stay, because the meadows from clear back in the 1860s, 1870s, when the first settlers came and they brought goats and sheep before the cows arrived, they went out and they blew up our meadows. And they blasted the bottoms of them, including Yosemite and every meadow that you can find has big holes at the bottom of the meadow. And what that happens then is that the water is drained, and that was the whole point, to drain the meadows for their animals. But now, and since that time, when it snows or rains, because it runs off so fast, it deepens the waterways and the channels within the meadow. And so now those are anywhere from 6 inches to, I've seen a couple of them 3 feet deep. And so you have to now imagine that, where's the surface of the meadow? Well, it's 3 feet up. And if plants and flowers need water at 1 or 2 feet, they're no longer getting water, even though there's plenty of water running through the meadow, because the water table is too low and it's just flying off. It's not saving it. Well, we take that to a bigger picture. If you're not saving it up there at the water, where the watershed is and where the headwaters are, you're really not going to save it in our coffers either. You're not going to be able to save it in the dam, because it's running off too fast. And if it's sitting in like Millerton Lake and the bigger lakes, we're losing a good 20% of our water through evaporation. Our hydros are all antiquated, and we've got like 15 of them, every one of them. And they lose water because of their system. There's only like one that probably they could, up there at Eastman's, would probably be the only ones they could fight with me and say that it doesn't lose water when it generates power. So we, as the valley, urban, and farmers, cannot afford to lose 20% of our water, or even 40% of our water. And I'll throw into that 40% the canopy back into the forest, why it burned, because it's at 80 to 90% thickness. The trails are all gone. the drought hit. We're in our 36th year of drought since 1987. We're in our 6th drought since 1987. But in between, we've had this roller coaster, El Niños and flooding and atmospheric rivers and, extreme cold and extreme heats and droughts. This is the chaotic climate change that we've been enduring since 1987. And it's not going to quit. I have finally got the agency people to finally understand that it may not be too long before we're talking about our 50th. We're in 36 right now, year 36. 14 more years is not out of the question. To continue this same chaotic climate change, up and down, 2 years of drought, then flooding. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Right. So let me pause you there.
You better. I'm on a roll.
Well, one of the things I'm really, really appreciating about what you're saying is the way that you're linking all 4 elements into the conversation together, right? And how all the elements interact, and how the fire. Because it's often, I think, when I think about fire, prescribed burns, for example, to clear out some of the density of that. I don't hear people talking about prescribed burns in a context of all 4 elements. I hear them talking about prescribed burns as a form of reducing future fires, of making the future fires less hot or less bad. And what you're like taking this much wider ecosystem perspective, and this much wider, like you're thinking about what's up on top, what does it look like at the headwaters, and what does it look like at the dam, and what does it look like all the way through. You're taking that whole wide, like you're kind of the cycle of you're tracing the water cycle and how fire interweaves with that water cycle in a way that has this holistic perspective that I could very well imagine would be very confusing for the agencies in the California state and in other state and federal agencies who are trained not to take that holistic perspective, and to not think about it that way.
I really appreciate that you do have this perspective and that you are seeing what I'm talking about. I work with all the agencies, and I shy away from calling them partners anymore, because when you're working with agencies, it's a one-sided partnership. I like to look at them as alliances or allies if we're going down the same road, and sometimes we're not. Yes, many of the people are trained in a certain manner, and then they do their job per how they've been trained. But I'm not putting that kind of I'm not looking for the word blame at all. I'm not looking for who's responsible. Here's what's responsible. What's responsible is our commodity man thinking, I call it, our colonial concepts that have come with America. So, as a terrible analogy, but you'll understand this, when you order a pizza from a pizza company, you expect not only to get what you ordered, but you also expect it to be cut in slices. If it's not, you're like, hey, what? What's going on here? Now, if you were to order the pizza from a box that you got to cook, then of course you're going to have to cut it. But in our minds, when we order from the pizza company, we automatically want it sliced. And that's how we look at the environment. As a matter of fact, it's the concept we look at it at a lot of different things. We want it in pieces. And we want it the right piece. I don't want big fat pizza slices. I want 10 instead of 8. And I got people probably
And there's a
on.
particular way of slicing the pie. Yeah.
I got people probably online going, no, I like 8 because I like big fat pieces. Of course. But the bottom line is we always want something broken out. And instead of really looking at that whole picture, and that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about philosophy and concepts and our commodity thinking. I don't know. I'm trying not to be too political with you or what's going on, but you have to add a little bit in that. And I'm working with the forest, right? Right now, 3 forests are going through forest plan revision. They've been on it for 13 years. We're already supposed to be in the plan revision. And once it's signed, it will go for 20 to 30 years. But the 2 things that are in the forest plan revision is recreation sustainability and economic sustainability. There is no forest health sustainability.
Wow.
And when asked, well, we want to keep it flexible is the word I got. Flexible. Like, wow. Okay, I wasn't born yesterday, but thank you very much. On the other hand, let's look at recreation. Recreation is the forest number 1 economic endeavor. And number 2 for economic sustainability is logging and other production type endeavors that's going to make funding. So therefore, 1 and 2 are both economics. And that is how we're still thinking. All from the commodity mind. That everything has to make $1 now. Everything has to make money now. We are not thinking about down the road for our grandchildren's grandchildren. We can care less whether they have a forest, whether they have water. And I don't know if it was recorded or not, but I'm in the midst of, I'm the chair, one of the chairs for the Tribal Water Summit that's coming up. It's going to be huge. We're already at capacity with 400 participants, and it's tribes from all over the state agencies, federal agencies, and water organizations, all coming together to look at anywhere from 12 to 13, 14 different issues, from the Colorado River to to decommissioning of dams, to hydro relicensing, to cultural burning, drought, resistance, all different types of things that you might say are no longer, just about water. But our whole conversation here today, everything's about water. And we have to look at all sides of fire, water, air. And so really quickly, to go to air, when the agencies are burning, and the agencies are burning, they want to burn minimally 500 acres. They would prefer to burn 1,000 acres. They would love to burn 4,000. The whole point being that when agencies burn, they burn for acreage. When we're burning to restore the resources. We're burning because we want a return. We want the underbrush to return. But when we want it to return, we expect it to return within 1 month to 2 months. And when it does, it's going to be refreshed. And it's also going to be thinned. And if we did nothing with it again, it would take anywhere from 8 to 15 years to be overgrown again. But in that time period, all we have to do is apply 1 or 2 more fires, and we're good for about the next 20 years. And so when we burn, I burned in Mariposa this past February. At this point, I never seen one complaint from a neighbor. I never saw any complaints or heard any complaints from the town of Mariposa. And definitely no one in the valley even knew we burned.
Mm. Mm.
But when an agency lights a fire,
Mm-hmm.
500 acres, 1,000 acres, or 1,500 acres, not only does the local town people know about it, then the entire valley knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
And the other issue that we're working with is that I live out in the Academy, and I don't recall a fire out there, but I got law firms who send me information saying that at such and such a time we had a fire out there called something, and it's like, I never heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're telling me is you need to join this lawsuit, or you need to file a lawsuit on your own because you were in a fire zone and it damaged your house, and it probably damaging your lungs, and it's damaging your health. Then if you're actually in a fire zone, like up in the mountains where the creek fire was, those folks can't get insurance. Their insurance paid them off. They were either able to rebuild or buy another place. And now they have to go find insurance if they can get it. And in some cases, it's a state insurance because the insurance companies don't want anything to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got my own tribal members who tell me, well, we had 3 fires over here in the Wani Oakhurst area, and our insurance canceled us and said, you can't get fire insurance because we're in a fire-prone zone.
Mm.
And that then becomes the social well-being of our communities. And what we have to deal with, it's not just the fact that it burned. It continues to burn in many other ways. So that's why we're pushing for cultural burning, because even the smoke, for instance, is beneficial to the trees, to the parasites, to the weevils, to the worms. When I go out into the forest and parks, the first question I ask, give me a list of the species, the animal species that you have. Not the ones that are endangered or rare. I have that list.
Mm.
I don't want 5 or 6 of your species that you think you're supposed to be responsible for. I want the 100 species that you're responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know, how are you feeding bear? How are you feeding deer? How are you feeding turkey? How are you feeding squirrel? How are you feeding blue jay?
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeding woodpecker? If your trees are not producing acorn and you've got 1,000 of them and maybe 300 of them have some kind of acorn, that's only 1/3 when it should be 2/3.
Mm.
Most of our acorn that we gather, okay, I'll let you talk and just say, when we're out gathering acorn,
mm-hmm.
and we have a good acorn tree, it's going to give us 25 pounds, maybe 50. But if that tree was taken care of and had cultural burns underneath it, it would give us up to 200 pounds of acorn.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Now, sorry.
Mm. Well, I just thinking about how important acorn is, and how that shift in what the acorn and what the oak tree can give, shifts the whole ecosystem and helps care for humans as well as other creatures. So It's very significant what you're saying.
Hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to add a personal experience to that from
Mm.
being out on the land for the first time at a cultural burn. What was so amazing to me was seeing the sourberry patch come back, and Ron can probably speak to that, but I saw out there Julie Tex, I believe her name is, and other basket weavers collecting sourberry after, I think it was at least a year after the last burn had happened, and they were coming up straight, like just straight out of the land, these beautiful stems, and they were leading the way. The basket weavers were talking about what needs to be pruned, what needs to be burned. It wasn't just about the like Ron is talking about, yes, mitigating extreme wildfires and so on, but it's also about, as Ron was saying, the cultural resources and the basketry and the food for people and animals, but that humans are part of the landscape. And I got to see that up close and personal through that experience at the Jack Kirk estate that Ron was leading.
Mm. And I'm curious, Katerina, for yourself, what was it like to just participate in a burn for the first time?
Yeah, it was for me. So I grew up in Mariposa where this burn happened, and where this cultural burn happened. And in recent years, I believe just 2 years ago, the Oak fire went through, similar to what Ron was talking about with the Creek fire, because because cultural burns or even prescribed fire was suppressed for so many years because of colonization and removal of people from the land, and the Forest Service being scared of wildfire, not knowing how to relate with fire, as Ron was talking about the danger of that, lack of relationship there. The Oak fire, like other devastating wildfires, came within a half-mile of my family home. And it was a very traumatic experience, as I couldn't get a hold of my dad. There was no service out there to see if he was okay. A friend's house I knew burned down close by, and she lost everything. People were, trying to save animals and bring them out. And when it turned out, our home was spared, but others, neighbors and families' homes were lost. And when I went back up to see the land, it was like a moonscape. Like even the
Mm.
soil burned. It was so hot. Like it was not the kind of good fire like we're hearing here. It just consumed the underbrush that was, I think, needing fire for many years, and became so hot that it burned everything and just left matchsticks in some places of trees. So that was so painful for me to see. And then to be invited and to attend this cultural burn was just a healing experience in the wake of experiencing that devastating wildfire, to go back out and to participate in groups that were doing, small burn piles. It was done in a prayerful way. There was song and ceremony and prayer done before and during. And there was a sense of community, and like we just enjoyed being together, eating together, talking, sharing, being part of physical labor, participating and caring for the land. So for me, it was a healing experience as well as a learning experience that I can go and apply and hopefully go back and relearn in upcoming years, to further my practice of how this kind of burning is done, to apply that on the land where my dad currently lives, still in Mariposa. He's been doing small brush piles like cultural burning, but it's not cultural burning in the same way. And I learned ways of even just raking the ash into the soil to mix the soil, as Ron taught, that will help with the regrowth of native plants and wildfires in those areas that have been burned, so that things like sourberry plants can return healthier than before, that aren't burned down to the roots, and that there's not that kind of moonscape left afterwards. So those were some of my takeaways, as well as just seeing over 180 people. I think almost 200 people were there, some from many fire
Mm.
agencies, students from students from Fresno, but students from UC Davis were there, and professors, just people coming to share this experience, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, coming together to learn on the land from our elders and teachers. So it was really a special, and for me, healing experience to participate in.
I remember when you first told me about it, I was just so happy that it's happening at all, and that more and more people are learning how to do these cultural burns. And I was really impressed that fire agencies, that California fire agencies are themselves participating. And I'm wondering, like, how did that happen? Because the history of California fire agencies, as in most of U.S. fire management and forest management, has been so deeply against any form of Indigenous knowledge and against any form of um, uh, cultural burns or burns that might have anything remotely spiritual attached to them. Like, all of this is in so many ways antithetical to the history of the forest department. So I'm just, how did it happen that now people in the fire agencies are themselves participating under your leadership, and under leadership of other Indigenous peoples in participating in these spiritual and cultural burns?
Wonderful. Well, first of all, because I work with these agencies, and because have been stumbling blocks with them and challenges, that it's best just to bring them out there and have them do, as Katerina was just saying, participate in it, become one of the community people, become one of the, at one with fire, and not have to, we had comments from some of the forest folks that, they came with their chaps, and they came with their hard hats, and they came with their yellow jackets, and if you got them, wear them. We don't, because we're cultural burners, but secondly, because we're also very highly trained. We've been burning this year. I already have 8 burns throughout California, from Sonoma all the way down to Dunlap, and we're gonna all the way down to Porterville, down to Tachi land. We've burned Tule land. We burned all the way down there as well. And yet, after some 20 years of burning, we have never had any kind of a serious injury. And we've never had a fire escape. Because, again, as I said before, we burn what we're intending to burn. But we also have, safety meetings, and we're very cognizant of how to use tools and what we need to be doing. Doesn't mean that there's not some close calls, and maybe some scrapes and some bumps. But again, getting the people then to come out and understand that their way of doing things is not the only way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I keep stressing, that there is room for both of us to work together, to play together, to figure out how to challenge, this climate resistance, build a resilience together. And that's the only way to make it happen. The other thing is that we are, as I already said, we had like 8 different places we burned, and got 2 or 3 more on the charts. But it's important, and right now, that what we're doing, we've been recording with the tribes all over the state and out of state, and asking them, did you burn? Did you used to do cultural burning? Do you want to burn? Are you burning? What are you burning? How are you burning? What help can we give you? And this time, Miss Katerina was out there with us, and Renee, that the Siletz tribe came down, and one of the other tribes from Oregon came all the way from Oregon, and they want us to come up and burn with them, you know, and we plan to make it happen. Sonoma State was there, and Sonoma, Santa Rosa Junior College was there, and we've already been back there with the California Indian Basket Makers Association once, and we're going back up at the end of April again to another one. And so as we move around, the whole point being is that we're going to start helping folks burn. Last November during Veterans Day, I'm a veteran, but I kind of got tired of going to the parades, and I said, well, I need to do something more constructive. So went back to burning, and I had a small burn, had 24 people showed up, and Berkeley brought some students down, quite a few actually, and some of the other colleges popped in, and even UC Merced. So I counted that we had, to my knowledge, 5 tribal areas from Miwok Coast up in Santa Rosa. Actually, I just found out it was like Tamales Bay area, and then one of the Miwok groups and ourselves, but we had five areas that burned at the same time during Veterans Day weekend. My plan and my hopes that there's 24 tribes, and maybe someday we'll have 3, 4, 5 dozen tribes all burning throughout the state. And it doesn't matter how big, but you can see the progression that what we're talking about as it begins to take off. But again, it all comes back to the biggest challenges that we have is everybody that comes to me is all speaking in terms of the same agencies that I invite. They're having trouble within their area.
You mean once they work with you and then they go back to work in their agency, then they're struggling about how to communicate.
Their agencies are saying no, but it's the same agency, like forest, like CAL FIRE, like state parks, but at the same, or even national parks. But at the same time, we just have to keep moving until we get to the point. You asked about the indigenous knowledge, and there was a directive that came out from Washington last July about indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. And that in turn has started to move federal agents and even some state.
There was a directive for agencies to take traditional ecological knowledge into consideration.
Not only consideration, but implementation.
That's very significant. That's a big shift.
And the North Fork Mono tribe happened to be one of the 3 or 4 that was highlighted in there. So, we're pretty proud of that. But
yeah,
the main thing is that we got to keep moving this force, and that's about the only way you're going to eventually make a change. It's just, I had a really good friend of mine that was a forest district ranger, and his most famous words, I don't know if his most famous words for me, he used to look at a picture like this and say, boy, he says, we got an elephant in the room. How do you eat the elephant? And everybody look at him like it's kind of crazy, but you say, well, one bite at a time, one bite at a time. Like, yeah, all right. And that's sure where we're going to start chewing on that elephant, but okay, one bite at a time,
Yes. Yes, indeed. And I'm curious, Katerina, for you as a pastor, not as a member of an agency or as a student, but as a pastor, um, what was your experience going into that as a member of a spiritual community and who's leading others into spiritual experiences and relationships with the land?
Yeah. Yeah. So I pastor a church community called Wild Church Fresno, and that's really at the heart of our purpose. Our vision is to reform spiritual connection with the land, with Creator, with the divine presence, with one another. But the real broken relationship that we have, we're seeing so many symptoms of that disconnection from the land, like droughts and climate change and so on. Is we need to heal us. We need to do the work of healing that spiritual connection that's been so degraded over time, due to many of the things that we're talking about, and colonization and the economic system that we live in. For me, the experience of restoring fire to the land really brought me back to some of the metaphors and images. So I come from the Christian tradition, in the Bible, of the divine presence in fire. So, for example, the burning bush. God speaks to Moses. Creator speaks to Moses from the flames of this burning bush and calls him back to his true identity, and to a path of liberation. And then isn't there a pillar of smoke, which I assume there's fire there too, that guides people out? And then I think of, like, in the book of Acts in Pentecost, the Spirit falls on people like tongues of flame. So we have these images of good fire, and of not only fire as separate, but like the Spirit is in the fire, in the flame.
Quite literally, yeah.
Literally, yeah. And so as a pastor, I was just thinking, I wonder if we need to do our own work of reclaiming fire. When I faced my own fears of fire because of the wildfire experiences, that maybe there's some spiritual reconnection with fire that needs to happen as well, to return to some of these roots of the ways that fire is one of the ways that I believe God shows up in the world, or that the divine presence shows up through the earth or through creation. Maybe this is getting, too far into a religious bent, but that was one of my reflections afterwards. And I also feel more committed to inviting my church community to a stance of listening and learning from the first peoples, from the indigenous host peoples of this land, and to practicing more humility when it comes to Christian presence here. That we have so much to learn, and there oftentimes Christianity has gone towards the religion of empire, but there are also strands of Christianity that are of the land, and that are of the religion of the oppressed as well. And so I think we have just a lot of work to do as Christians to kind of return to some of the roots of our faith, and return to the ways that the land is very much, and this vision of restoring the land is what I believe creator is working, inviting us to work with God, to work with the Creator, to restore the earth and not to destroy the earth, as the sort of cosmic end goal or vision of love and restoration and balance, rather than of wasting this planet and tossing it away and then going off to Mars or to heaven or to some other place. I really believe about the teachings of Jesus about heaven is coming down to earth in the kingdom, or I like to say the kingdom of God, where we're all kin, and remember that sense of community and kinship relationship with one another in the earth. So yeah, those are some initial reflections. I feel like, there's so much here. I'm excited to keep learning and to invite other people of faith to learn from folks who have been keeping the fire and also keeping alive a spiritual connection with the land that we all need to learn from and to do our own work of decolonization around.
Mm. Mm.
I'm curious if Ron has any responses to that, or what your thoughts are, Ron.
Well, plenty.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a Methodist pastor that moved up to Sonoma, and she used to invite me in on Earth Day to her church, and we'd do a co talk, together, and that was pretty cool. At first, her congregation was a little taken back, I think, but it didn't bother her, and he used to call her the barefoot preacher because she was always barefoot. Might have stockings on, but she didn't like wearing shoes. And even when she did the Easter ceremony at 6 o'clock in the morning, out here in Academy, it would be no shoes on. It's like, dang, that's one tough little preacher. I said, yeah, but that's one of the reasons we lead with our workshop on Saturdays. We're already burning on Fridays and prepping, but when the whole group arrives on Saturdays, then the workshop is first built around the ceremony and built around the spirituality. And you've heard me, speak in terms of that the spirits are here and the spirits are listening to us. And we as people recognize the spirits of all things. Doesn't matter how you believe, it's how we believe. And how we believe is that Creator created everything. And when he did, he gave the same spirit. He didn't have a different spirit for plant or a different spirit for dog. We all got the same spirit. And because we did, we're all related. And in that spiritual relationship, and then we recognize the fact that there's a hierarchy that we look at. Whether you're a tree, a cloud, water, bear, lion, that it's not an individual thing. That there's kind of we all have a hierarchy. We all have, someone who sits like in charge of wind, in charge of cloud, in charge of the mountain, in charge of bear. And so when we are speaking in this term and this thought, we're not just speaking to, one particular animal or species. We're speaking to more of the spiritual. And that in that spiritual, now you can equate that in the Bible to like angels or saints or other types of empowerments that Creator gave out. But again, he did create everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in his creation is his power. And therefore, he is a lot more powerful than we ever dreamed to be. But recognizing this power is that how then can I tap into it? I did an article recently called Power to Medicine. And what I'm explaining in this article, and without taking a whole lot of time, is if you want to charge your cell phone, you take your charge cord, you plug it into the wall, and you plug it into the cell phone. Why? Because in your mind, you're going to get power out of that socket. And it's going to charge your phone. And when your phone is charged, now you can disseminate your medicine. Whether you're preaching or talking, taking care of business, whatever, that's still your medicine. Now, But why did you think there was power in that wall or in that socket? Because because I know it is, because that's where the electricity comes into. Oh, I see. So if we're looking at Creator, then how do we know Creator has power? Well, that's a dumb question, because we know he does, right? And we know that if we tap into that power, that good things can come to us. But we're no different than if we plug that cell phone into the wall, or if we plug our hearts in somewhere else, or into one of you, and open ourselves up. And so when we're praying, when we're doing the workshops, we have someone who leads the prayer. We got several people who can do that. I choose one that I like to work with. He does a great job. I can do the same job. Others can. Then we ask for song. Song from everybody and anybody that wants to sing. And some of the younger ones, I already this year pointed to them and said, when you come back next year, you bring me a song. So that I'm somewhat forcing them to go and find a song, to go home and learn a song, right? So you may say, as a preacher, might actually assign homework. Well, here's a chapter, we need to study this. This is what we're going to study next, at our next session, or this is what we're going to go. But you're giving them that same empowerment. How then do they make it fit? And so when you cause someone to step outside of their comfort zone, that's when you're going to tap into their empowerment, their energy connection. And that's when you're going to get the transfer of power in that cord from them to the world, to the spirit world, to everybody that's in that circle. And at this time, I have an agenda. I always have an agenda. Most of the agenda went out the window, especially when we had 7 songs. I normally look at 3 or 4, and then there were more. It could have been more, because that's what was happening. Yeah. So,
Well, I'm so appreciative of everything you're both sharing, and we had to end this conversation right now. But because things don't always go as we plan in life.
that agenda we can't always follow.
It's that agenda. Yeah, I like very rarely ever. And I just very much appreciate the generosity of your sharing for both of you, and the tenderness. And there's so much in this question of like, what does it mean to let ourselves reach and to be sometimes uncomfortable and to release to this higher and greater creator, that may return us to a different relationship with fire and a different relationship to ourselves through fire, and in so to water and to the gift of life itself.
I had an elder, as we go out now. He used to tell me, he was very, very staunch, in I think he was a Baptist, but he used to say all the time, you go to church, sing loud so everybody can hear you. I said, oh, everybody don't want to hear me. I'm a terrible singer. He goes, God don't think so. God don't care how you sing. Sing, It's like, okay, but
thank you.
And it don't matter what kind of song you're singing or who you're singing, and
it's about sharing your voice.
I've been in other circles where I've had folks from other countries listen to us and then go, I would just love to share a song, but it's Celtic. We don't care who it's from. It's a song. We want to hear the song.
We want to hear the song, and the land wants to hear the song.
That's exactly right. Sing.
Thank you. Keep singing, both of you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. I am always happy to hear from you, dear listener, to continue finding ways to connect the disconnected and go deeper on your own journey of remembering and reenchanting with your communities, your organizations, and your families. I invite you to check out our courses and other community offerings via the Sequoia Summit Via website. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Though I must admit I spend much more time working with really amazing people than crafting social media. If you want to work with me one-on-one or bring me to speak at your organization or family office, you can find out more at sarajolena.com.